Welcome to an introduction to compositing. So this is all about rendering a background picture and then compositing it with a 3D render that we've done. So we're going to bring different renders together into one final render. Now compositing is done in the node editor. We're going to show you how to view your composite changes live, so anything you change you can see the effect, and then learn how to scale the background image independently of the final render resolution. And you'll see how that can be a bit of a pain if we don't. So let's go hop on over into Blender. Right, so now we're over in Blender. The first thing I want to show you is just a recap on the render layers. So if we go over to our properties panel, properties window here, and go to the render layers tab, and we can see we've got one render layer. Now if we go ahead and render that with the F12 key, we can see that the cube renders. If we turn on another render layer and do exactly the same thing, or you can go up here to the render menu, hit render image, you'll notice that it renders twice. And that's because it's rendering each one of these individually. So do bear in mind, if you've got lots of render layers, it will slow down your render, especially if it's an animation. So I'm going to get rid of this extra render layer we've created at the moment and go to the node editor. Now once we're in the node editor, we need to switch the modes to the compositing node, and along the header bar it is the second option along on this little group of icons along here. Now once we're in there, nothing will visibly change just yet because first of all we don't have use nodes selected, so let's go and put a tick in that box. Okay, so when we zoom in, we can see, very similar to the materials editor when we're using that with nodes, we've got render layers here and it's plugged into the composite node. And this is what you're getting when you render. This is your output, and in this case the render layer is the input. Now there are lots of different types of input and we can add them through the add menu, and if we go to input we can see there is a list we can pick from. Now in this case we'll want to pick image. And if we use an image, we can go and find the image that you've downloaded and prepared for this particular section. There we go. I'm just going to open that up. It looks wonderful. And if I plug that in to our composite output, when we go and render, it will look like that. Now, it looks slightly wrong. Now, why does it look wrong? That is because the picture is bigger than the render space we've asked. So let's go to the render properties and have a look. So we've got 50% of 1080 and this picture was quite a high resolution. So if I turn that up to 100, let's just see how that comes out. Okay, it's going to take a few moments to render out. And we can see that there's more of the picture being shown, but not all of it. And this can be a real pain because I certainly don't want to render at a super high resolution if I'm just prototyping. I just don't want to do that. So we'll sort this out right away. So let's go back to the node editor, and I'm going to leave this render layers alone at the moment, and we need to do something with this output. So we've got the input, which is the image, and we need to do something before it gets to the output. And we need to add in a distortion, because we're distorting that image, we're changing it, and we've got a scale option. Now when we put the scale option in, there's lots of different choices we can choose from, but to keep it in line with the render output, we need to select render size. There are a couple of options here. In this particular case, I'm going to pick crop. Now it shouldn't matter. Let's render this scene out again. It shouldn't actually matter. We get the cube there, what the rendering settings are set at. So that's the whole picture cropped in to fit the 1080 scene. So that's absolutely fine. We can adjust that if we wanted to, but that's fine with me. Now let's turn this down to, let's say, 20% if I was doing a very quick render, and let's see how that comes out. And let's zoom in. Absolutely fine. And that was really quick as well, a lot quicker than the first time round. Okay, so we've got that all set up now. What else can we do? Well, you can do lots of things in this node editor, just like you can when setting up materials. So you can mix things together, you can change the RGB curves if you wanted to. There's lots you can play with. But one of the things that would be very useful is anything we're changing, it'd be nice to see it live without having to worry about hitting F12 every time and waiting for it to render out. So how do we do that? Well, we need to add a viewer. Now, if you've got Node Wrangler enabled, you can hold down Shift Control and hit the, in this case, the scale output, and that will introduce a viewer. as an output type. Now what we'll want to do here is I'm going to get rid of that and go add output, output, and there's the viewer. That's how you add it in manually. And we can just link those together. Now we don't see anything as yet. We need to tick on backdrop on the header bar here. So there we go. We can start to see this. And auto render. Now you'll notice that this is tiny, and again it's being governed by this resolution setting over here. So I'm going to turn that back up to 50%. Nothing happens for the moment. It would be really nice if it auto rendered all the time. It sometimes doesn't, so I've turned backdrop on and off again, and there we go. Now it can be a little bit difficult to work out. Let's give myself a bit more space on the screen here. It can be very difficult to actually work with nodes while the image is there. So in the properties panel, that's the N panel of the node editor, we've got a couple of options we can choose from. And if we scroll down where we can see backdrop, it's now turned on. So that's another toggle. It's the same as the one down here. If I use the drop down so I can see what's going on, there's a zoom setting so we can zoom in and out, which is very useful. And we've got an offset as well. Now, I don't tend to play with the offset. I literally hit the move button, and then you can move this freely, perhaps to a top corner. And then we can work on the nodes lower down if we wanted to. We can also hit fit, and then it will fit it appropriately to the screen, determined by the resolution. And reset backdrop, well, it's not done much in this case, but it will reset it to its default position and zoom size, etc. So I'm going to move that up to the top corner here. Okay, so we've got everything ready to start playing with, and I think it's time for a challenge. I would like you to go ahead and render your first composite. Now, I know what you're thinking, hang on a minute, Mike, you've not told us how to do this. Well, I think you already know. If you've already done a lot with the cycles materials and blending those together, I think you'll be just fine. So it is very similar to the cycles material setup. You will need at least 2 input nodes because we're compositing, we're bringing 2 things together. I would suggest in this case you keep the image, and if you've not got it in there, add back in the render layer. And the output node is a composite node, just in case you've been playing. And you will need to mix those together. There's a healthy hint as to what you will need to do. So pause the video now and give that a go. Okay guys, welcome back. I hope you managed to do this. Let's go render our first composite over in Blender. Okay, so we have our render layer here. We've got the scene preview. Everything's all set up. And so we need to mix a render layer. If I zoom in so you guys can see what's going on, I need to mix this image here with this render layer here. Now, this is going to probably look horrible. It doesn't matter at this point. It's literally to mix these two together. So if we go ahead and add in a mix node. Now, color mix, there we go. I found the mix. Of course, you could have searched up here for mix. So we've got these 2 image inputs. Let's just mix them together. And then I'm going to Control and Shift click mix. That's because I've got Node Wrangler enabled on the add-ons. And the viewer itself, what do I want to do here? The viewer needs to be here. Oh no, the output here, viewer here, and scale needs to go to there as well so I can see what's going on. Oh no, it's just an output from here to here. I'm being daft. There we go. So what's going on here? Well, it's mixing them together and one's overriding the other. Let's just see what happens if we render that out. Does it do the same thing? Yes, so one's on top of the other. Now, can we mix them together in a way that means we can see both of them? Let's literally try some options. Well, this is the problem here. We've got the factor set at 1, so that is no good. So here we go. If we blend them together, we can start to see they come through. And there are lots of other options. And we'll get into some of those in more detail very, very soon, because we're going to have to start using multiplication and division. And you'll start to understand how do you multiply and divide an image. That makes no sense. Don't worry, we'll get to that very shortly. But if we divide, we get an interesting image. It's very bright. And again, we can play with the factor. And that's quite an interesting one. So you can play with these to your heart's content and see what you end up with. And in this case, there's our cube together. It's sort of almost superimposed. Let's render that out. So one, the other, and it's put them together. Perfect. How did you guys get on? Did you manage to composite these two images together? If you have, congratulations, well done. Please share your phantom cube, or perhaps you picked a different shape, in the discussions, and I will see you guys in the next lecture.